We've coded up our HTML, reset the CSS, added foundational styles, some colors, and some typography. I mentioned this earlier, but so far we've only been building the styles for the mobile version of our site. Now we're ready to start getting into more intermediate techniques. Let's get started by building out our image gallery. First, I want to review our HTML. We built our gallery as an unordered list. Here, we have the unordered list container with list items inside of it. Each list item is composed of a link, and inside of that link is an image and its caption. There are multiple unordered lists on our page, so let's add an ID to this list so we can identify this list in particular. I'll call it Gallery. Great. Now let's jump into our CSS after saving this file, and let's start building out the styles for our gallery. This particular gallery is going to take up 2 columns on our mobile site. Later on, we'll expand it to 3 columns on the desktop layout, but most of the styling we'll need will already be complete by that point. We'll select the gallery element in a moment, but first we need to add some special styling to our images on our site. I'm going to tear off this tab in Google Chrome and expand it so that we can resize this browser window. Now, presently, this is what our site looks like. When we resize it so that it's closer to a mobile size, you'll see that we have some positioning issues, but most importantly, our images are entirely too large. So that's what we need to fix right now. I'm going to leave the browser window like this because that's the way that we should be looking at it if we're building out the mobile version first. In order to fix our images, we're going to give them a max width of 100% in the general section of our CSS. So just like this. I'll go right below the anchor element styles, and I'll type image and say max width 100%. This won't generate any immediately obvious changes, but it will become important once we start resizing the list items which contain our images. Basically, this max width of 100% tells the images to fill the width of their parent container. If the container shrinks down in size, then the image will shrink down with it. Without this piece of styling, the images would break outside their containers and we'd get some very strange looking pages. Let's style the gallery so you can see how this helps. I'm going to create a new section of our CSS called Page Portfolio. That way, we'll know that this styling is specific to this page and doesn't really get used on other pages. So I'm going to copy our heading here, and I'm going to scroll down and paste it just below the footer. And like I said previously, I'm going to call this Page Portfolio. There we go. And now we'll select the gallery element and apply some styling. So we'll use the ID selector, as we've done previously. We'll set the margin to 0, set the padding to 0, and set the list style to none. The new property here is list style. This will remove any kind of bullet points from a list if we set it to none. In this case, we're using an unordered list to lay out our gallery, so we don't want the bullet points. Now, let's style the list items. We want them to be in 2 columns somehow, and there's many ways that we could do that in CSS. One technique is to use a property called float, which will make the elements appear side by side. I want you to follow along while I type this. Afterwards, I'll explain the code. So, I'm going to select the gallery, and then select the list items inside of the gallery. And we're going to say float left. We'll give it a width of 45%, a margin of 2.5%, a background color of F5, 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 and finally, a color of BD, C3, C7. There's a couple of things going on here. First, I'm going to save this and then refresh the page so that you can see what this code just did. As you can see, our gallery is starting to take shape as a two-column layout. And if we expand this out, it starts to even look better at desktop sizes, but there's still more improvements that we can do there later on. First, the big new idea here is the float property, which is a property that allows us to position elements in a special way. The idea comes from print design, where an image is floated on the page to the left or the right, and the text then flows around that image. On the web, the float property has evolved to become extremely versatile. Floating these elements will make them appear side by side rather than stacking on top of each other like we saw previously. Second, I've set their width to 45%. That means regardless of the size of the browser window, whether it's on a desktop or a mobile phone, each image will only ever take up 45% of the total width of its parent element. So you can see here how the images are scaling, and no matter what size the browser window is, those images take up 45% of the width. Since every parent element above the list items are not set, they default to 100%. That means that the width of our images will be 45% of the total width of the page. 45 divides into 100 twice with a remainder of 10. That means we'll have two images floated side by side with 10% extra room that we can use to create space between our images. To create that space and round it up to 100%, I've used the margin property and set it to 2.5%. So if we go back to the browser window, you can see that each image has a margin on each side of 2.5%. So, in other words, each image has a 5% margin in total. There's 2.5 here, 2.5 there, and then this second image has 2.5 here and 2.5 there. So if you take 2.5 and multiply it by 1, 2, 3, 4 times, that gives you a total of 10%. That will fill the extra 10% of space that we had to play with previously. Finally, I've set the background color to what will look like a medium gray color. Let's flip back to our website. If you look at our website, you'll see that this background color comes across for each one of the captions. Finally, I've set the color of our text to this gray color here. You won't see that come across really unless any of the captions are unlinked for some reason. Rather, what's being displayed here is the color of linked text, which in this case is this green color.